The night that began with music and ended with silence. The crowd was alive long before the music began. Lights moved like restless stars. Cameras flashed like lightning, and thousands of voices filled the air outside the stadium. Inside, the energy grew heavier with every minute, the kind of weight that makes your chest tighten with both excitement and something else you cannot name. Keanu stood near the back of the VIP section, quiet and thoughtful, while Sandra leaned forward, eyes fixed on the stage where the band was tuning their instruments. She looked happy, but he noticed the way her fingers trembled each time someone shouted her name from the crowd. She was trying to hide the pressure behind her smile. The night was supposed to be simple. Two old friends, a concert, and a few hours away from the noise of Hollywood. But deep inside, Keanu knew this night was different. He had carried something inside his heart for too long, something that had followed him through every movie set, every award night, and every silent drive home. And as the first chords of the song echoed through the stadium, he realized that hiding it had begun to hurt more than speaking it. The music roared like thunder, and the audience swayed together. Sandra laughed as confetti fell from above, the colors glowing under the lights. Keanu smiled at her laughter, a sound that had once helped him through the darkest years of his life. Yet behind his calm expression, his heart was in conflict. Part of him wanted to protect their friendship, the bond that had survived years of distance and unspoken emotions. The other part whispered that life was too fragile, too short to keep pretending. The camera on the big screen caught them for a brief moment. The crowd cheered louder when their faces appeared, and Sandra waved awkwardly, embarrassed but glowing. Keanu just nodded with a small grin, but his eyes said something else. She noticed it. It was the same look he had given her once, many years ago, after a long day on set when both were too young to understand what that look meant. Back then, they called it friendship. Now, it felt like a question that had never been answered. When the next song began, Keanu felt his heartbeat align with the rhythm. He remembered the words of an old friend who had once told him, "The right time never comes. You just decide to stop waiting." He took a slow breath and turned toward Sandra. She was watching the band, completely unaware that her life was about to change. For a moment, he almost lost his courage. What if this ruined everything? What if she laughed or turned away? But then he saw how the stage lights painted her face, soft and pure, and he knew the truth deserved to be spoken, even if it cost him everything. The concert grew louder. People jumped, sang, and lived in that wild freedom that only music can give. Keanu leaned closer so she could hear him over the noise. She turned her head slightly, her hair brushing his shoulder. "Sandra," he said softly, his voice nearly drowned by the drums. "There's something I've wanted to tell you for a long time." She blinked, surprised by the sudden seriousness in his tone. Before she could ask, he looked down, almost smiling, but not quite. "But maybe not here," he added. She nodded slowly, sensing something heavy behind his calm expression. When the band played Everlong, something shifted. Sandra had always loved that song. She closed her eyes, letting the melody wash over her, while Keanu stood still, his mind miles away. He remembered the accident that had changed his life, the losses that had broken him, and the kindness she had shown when everyone else kept their distance. She had never asked for anything, never expected him to be anyone but himself. That was the moment he realized that the love he felt was not the kind that fades with time. It was the kind that stays, quiet but unshakable. After the final song, the crowd began to leave. The air smelled of sweat, rain, and spilled soda. They walked outside together, surrounded by flashing lights and fans shouting their names. Sandra laughed again, pulling her hoodie up to hide her face. Keanu stayed silent, his hands in his pockets. When they reached the quiet corner near the parking lot, she finally looked at him. "You've been strange all night," she said softly. "What's going on?" He met her eyes. For a long second, neither spoke. Cars passed behind them, and the night wind carried the faint echo of music. "I think I've been afraid," he said at last. "Afraid of losing something that means more to me than anything else." Her expression softened. "Keanu, you'll never lose me," she said gently. "You know that?" He smiled faintly but shook his head. "Maybe not as a friend," he whispered, "but what if I want more than that?" The words hung in the air like a fragile note that could break at any moment. Sandra froze. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. For years, she had wondered what would happen if he ever said something like that. But hearing it now, under the quiet lights of a parking lot after a concert, felt unreal. "Keanu," she said slowly, "you don't have to say this now." But he stepped closer, his voice low and calm. "I do. I've kept it inside for too long. And I'm tired of pretending that what I feel is just friendship." She looked at him, her heart racing, caught between shock and something deeper. All the moments they had shared, movie sets, late-night calls, silent car rides, flashed before her eyes. Part of her wanted to cry, part of her wanted to smile. "Why now?" she asked. He exhaled, his breath visible in the cold air. "Because," he said quietly, "tonight I saw you laughing, and I realized that the sound of your laughter is the only thing that has ever made me feel at peace." Her eyes glistened. For a second, she thought she might step forward, close the space between them, and say what she truly felt. But before she could, the sound of shouting broke the silence. Fans had spotted them again. Camera flashes exploded like sparks, and security guards rushed toward them. Sandra looked around, startled, and Keanu gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Let's go," he said softly. They walked quickly toward the car, surrounded by chaos. The moment was gone, swallowed by noise and light, but as Sandra sat inside and the doors closed, her hands were still trembling. Keanu started the engine but didn't speak. She turned to him, searching for words, but the city lights passed too fast outside the window. He looked calm, but his jaw was tight. Finally, she whispered, "We'll talk about it later." He nodded, eyes on the road. "Yes," he said quietly, "but later might be too late." The words hit her like a quiet storm. She turned to look at him, but he kept driving, his face unreadable. Outside, the city of Toronto glowed in gold and silver, and the rain began to fall again. Neither of them knew that the night that began with music was only the beginning of something far more complicated, something that would test their hearts in ways they had never imagined. As they crossed the bridge, lightning flashed in the distance. Sandra reached out as if to say something, but stopped. Keanu's phone buzzed with a message that made him tighten his grip on the steering wheel. She saw the change in his expression, but before she could ask, he whispered to himself, "Not now, please." The message came from a number she didn't recognize, and just like that, the story that had waited for years to begin took a darker turn. The message that changed the night, the sound of rain against the windshield grew heavier as they drove through the quiet Toronto streets. The city lights blurred into long golden lines across the glass, and the air inside the car felt thick with everything left unsaid. Sandra sat silently, her fingers tracing invisible circles on the window, trying to calm the storm that was building inside her chest. Keanu's phone was still glowing faintly on the dashboard, the screen flashing once more before turning dark. She could feel the tension in the air, even though he said nothing. Finally, she asked softly, "Was that something important?" He didn't answer at first. His jaw tightened again, and he stared at the road ahead as if every red light was a test of patience. "Maybe," he said after a moment. "Someone I thought I wouldn't hear from again." There was something in his tone that made her uneasy. She had known him for decades, long enough to recognize when he was hiding pain. And tonight, for the first time in years, he wasn't hiding it well. They drove in silence for a few more blocks until he stopped the car near the lake. The city skyline shimmered across the dark water, the reflection trembling under the rain. He turned off the engine and leaned back, exhaling slowly. "I didn't plan to say what I said tonight," he murmured. "But once I did, it felt like the truth had finally left my chest." She looked at him, unsure what to say. "Then why do you look like it hurt?" she asked. He smiled faintly, though his eyes stayed on the lake. "Because truth always hurts, before it heals." Sandra watched him for a long moment. Part of her wanted to reach out, to comfort him, but something inside held her back. Maybe it was fear, maybe confusion, or maybe the sudden realization that their lives, so full of quiet understanding, had changed in one night? Who was the message from? She finally asked, her voice careful, almost afraid of the answer. He hesitated, then turned the phone toward her. The message was short, just a few words. "We need to talk. It's about her." She frowned. "About who?" she asked. Keanu looked at the screen again, then locked it. "Someone from my past," he said quietly. "Someone I couldn't save." There was a tremor in his voice, the kind that comes from guilt that never fully fades. "Keanu," she said softly, "you don't have to carry everything alone." He gave a sad smile. "I know, but that's what I do best. I carry things, sometimes too long." The rain outside grew heavier. Thunder rolled across the distance, and the soft light from the dashboard painted their faces in pale blue. She wanted to change the subject, to bring back the warmth from earlier, but his words kept echoing in her mind. Someone I couldn't save. She remembered stories he had told her years ago about people he had lost. Friends, family, co-stars. There was always a quiet strength in the way he spoke, never dramatic, always honest. But tonight, she felt the weight of those memories sitting between them like a third presence. "You said tonight might be too late," she whispered. "What did you mean by that?" He looked at her finally, his eyes tired but clear. "I've spent too many years waiting for the right moment," he said, "and every time I waited, life moved forward without asking me if I was ready. I don't want to wake up one day and realize that the chance to say what I feel is gone forever." She felt her throat tighten. "So this is about us?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "It's always been about us." For a long while, neither spoke. The world outside the car blurred into sound and motion. In that silence, memories rose like old film reels. Laughs shared between takes, quiet dinners after long shoots, messages that said, "You okay?" when one of them disappeared for a while. She realized how much of her life had quietly revolved around him. Yet the thought of crossing that invisible line scared her. They had always been each other's safe place, and love, if spoken aloud, could either deepen that safety or destroy it completely. The wind grew colder, and Keanu stepped out of the car to clear his thoughts. The rain soaked his jacket almost instantly, but he didn't care. He stood by the lake, watching the ripples spread across the dark surface. Sandra hesitated, then followed him, pulling the hood of her jacket over her head. "You'll get sick," she said softly. He smiled faintly without turning around. "Maybe I already am," he said. Sick of silence. She moved closer until they were both standing side by side, looking at the lights of the city reflected on the water. "What are you afraid of?" she asked. He took a slow breath. "That I'll ruin what's left of something good," he said. "That you'll look at me differently. That all the things we built over years will fall apart because I couldn't keep my heart quiet." She looked at him, her eyes soft but strong. "You think love ruins things?" she asked. He shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "I think fear does." The words hit her harder than she expected. They stood there for a long time, rain dripping from their clothes, hearts speaking louder than their voices ever could. Then, suddenly, a car pulled up behind them. Headlights flashed across the wet road, and a woman stepped out, holding an umbrella. Sandra turned to look, but Keanu froze. It was Claire, his old assistant, someone she hadn't seen in years. She looked worried, almost desperate. "Keanu," she called out, her voice trembling. "It's urgent. It's about someone from your past. She's back." Sandra blinked, confused. "Who's back?" she asked. Claire looked at her briefly, then turned to Keanu. "It's Lena," she said quietly. "She reached out after all these years." Keanu's face went pale. The name hit him like thunder. Sandra could see something inside him shift, shock, regret, fear, all at once. She had heard that name before, years ago, in quiet conversations he never wanted to finish. Lena was the woman he had once tried to help during the hardest period of her life, someone he had lost touch with after tragedy struck. And now, she was back. "What does she want?" he asked, his voice low. Claire hesitated. "She said she found something," she said. "Something that belonged to you. And she's asking if you'll meet her." Sandra felt her chest tighten. The night, which had begun as music and confession, had turned into something else entirely. She looked at Keanu, waiting for him to say no, to stay. But instead, he looked away toward the city skyline and whispered, "Tell her I'll come." "Keanu," Sandra said softly, "you don't have to do this tonight." He turned to her, rain running down his face like tears. "Some things can't wait anymore," he said. "Not after tonight." The way he said it made her heart ache. She didn't know if this was about love, guilt, or something far deeper. She only knew that he was about to step into a past that still had the power to hurt him. Claire opened the car door for him, and he turned back toward Sandra one last time. "I'll call you," he said. She wanted to stop him, to ask him to stay, but the words wouldn't come. He gave her a faint, almost broken smile. "Thank you for tonight," he said, "for listening." And then he got into the car and drove off into the rain. Sandra stood there under the streetlight, soaked and shivering, watching the red taillights disappear into the mist. She felt something heavy settle in her chest, a mix of fear and realization. She had spent years waiting for him to speak, and when he finally did, the universe pulled him away again. She whispered to herself, "Please come back." But only the rain answered. Later that night, alone in her hotel room, she sat by the window and stared at the city lights. She thought about his words. Truth always hurts before it heals. She didn't know if his truth would ever find its way back to her. All she knew was that something had begun tonight that neither of them could stop. And far away, on a dark road outside Toronto, Keanu's phone rang again. He answered quietly, his voice barely a whisper. "Lena," he said. On the other end, a trembling voice replied, "Keanu, I found something you need to see. It's about Sandra." His heart stopped. The voice from the past, the city lights faded in the distance as Keanu drove through the rain-soaked highway. The world outside was a blur of silver reflections and the soft hum of tires against wet asphalt. Claire sat beside him in silence, holding her phone tightly, glancing at him now and then as if afraid he might change his mind. He didn't speak for several minutes. His mind replayed the last few moments with Sandra, her trembling voice, the look in her eyes, the words that still echoed in his head like a heartbeat. He couldn't quiet. Finally, he asked softly, "Where is she?" Claire hesitated. "In the old neighborhood near the art center," she said. "She said she couldn't talk over the phone." He nodded slowly, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "That's where it all started," he murmured, "and that's where it all ended." As they turned into the narrow streets of East Toronto, the rain eased. Streetlights flickered through fog, casting long shadows on the walls. Keanu's thoughts drifted back years earlier, a time when Lena had been part of his small circle of friends. She was kind, talented, and full of life, but also fragile. She had gone through something terrible, something that left scars he couldn't heal. He had tried to help her once, had promised to protect her, but fate had other plans. After she disappeared, rumors spread. Stories about addiction, loss, and a betrayal that haunted him for years. He parked near a dimly lit cafe, its neon sign flickering faintly. Claire stayed in the car while he stepped out, pulling his jacket close as he walked toward the door. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of coffee and wet clothes. There, in a corner, sat Lena. Her face was pale but gentle, her hair tied loosely, her eyes still carrying that quiet sadness he remembered. When she saw him, she smiled faintly. "You came?" she said. "After all these years?" Keanu nodded, his voice calm but careful. "You said you found something." She reached into her bag and pulled out an old envelope, slightly torn at the edges. "I kept this for a long time," she said. "I wasn't sure if I should ever give it to you." He frowned, confused. "What is it?" She slid the envelope across the table. "A letter," she said softly. "But not from me." He stared at it for a moment, hesitant. "Then from who?" he asked. Her voice trembled. "From Jennifer," she whispered. The name struck him like a sudden wave. Jennifer was his sister, the one he had lost decades ago in a tragic accident. He swallowed hard, his fingers trembling as he opened the envelope. Inside was a single page, yellowed and folded many times. His eyes moved over the familiar handwriting, and his heart began to ache in that old, familiar way. The letter wasn't long, but it carried the weight of everything he had buried for years. "Dear Keanu, I hope one day you read this. You were always the one who believed in light, even when the world got dark. If you ever find this, promise me you'll keep helping people. Promise me you'll keep love in your heart even when it hurts, because love is the only thing that survives us." The words blurred as he read them again and again. Lena watched quietly, tears forming in her eyes. "She gave it to me years ago," she said softly, "before she left for that trip. She told me to give it to you if she couldn't come back." He looked at her in disbelief. "Why now?" he asked. "Why after all this time?" She took a deep breath. "Because I saw you with her tonight," she said, meaning Sandra. "And I saw the same look in your eyes that Jennifer used to talk about. She said one day you'd meet someone who made you believe in kindness again. I think she was talking about her." Keanu sat back, silent, his heart pounding. Outside, the rain had stopped completely. He didn't know what to feel. Sorrow, relief, confusion. "Lena," he said finally, "you could have told me earlier." She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I wasn't ready," she said. "I was lost, and I thought you hated me for disappearing." He shook his head slowly. "I never hated you. I just thought I failed you." She gave a sad smile. "You didn't fail anyone, Keanu. You just never forgave yourself." The air in the cafe grew heavy with memory. He folded the letter gently and slipped it into his jacket. "Thank you," he said quietly. "This means more than you know." She reached across the table, her hand trembling. "There's more," she said. "She mentioned a promise, something about a gift she left for you. It's still at her old place. I can take you there." He hesitated, unsure if he was ready to face that part of his past. But something in her tone, the honesty, the sorrow, made him nod. As they stood up to leave, Claire appeared by the door. "Is everything okay?" she asked. Keanu nodded. "For now," he said. "We need to go somewhere." They drove together through the quiet streets until they reached a small house near the edge of the lake. It looked old but cared for, the kind of place where memories linger in the walls. Lena unlocked the door and led them inside. Everything was exactly as it must have been years ago. Framed photos, a dusty piano, a shelf filled with books. He walked slowly, touching the walls like he was touching time itself. In the corner of the living room sat a small wooden box. Lena pointed toward it. "That's what she wanted you to have," she said. Keanu knelt and opened it gently. Inside were photos, letters, and one small pendant, silver, with a tiny heart engraved on the back. He held it carefully, his fingers tracing the shape. On the inside was a single word, believe. He felt his throat tighten as he whispered, "She always said that." Lena placed a hand on his shoulder. "She believed in you," she said softly. "And she wanted you to keep believing in others." He nodded, fighting the tears. "Thank you, Lena," he said quietly. "For bringing this back." She smiled faintly. "You deserved peace," she said, "and maybe this will help you find it." Outside, the first light of dawn began to break through the clouds. Keanu stepped outside, breathing deeply, the pendant clutched in his hand. The world felt different, not lighter, but more real. He thought about Sandra. about the words he had said, about the look on her face when he walked away. He knew he couldn't leave things unfinished. Not again. Not after all this, he turned to Lena. I have to go, he said. She deserves to know everything. Lena nodded, her eyes soft. Go, she said. Don't let the past hold you anymore. He smiled faintly. Thank you. Then he walked toward the car, the morning light reflecting off the wet ground like 1,000 tiny stars. As he drove back toward the city, he replayed every moment of the night, the concert, the confession, the message, the letter. Everything felt connected, like invisible threads tying the past and the present together. He realized that love was never about timing or perfection. It was about honesty, even when it came late, even when it hurt. Meanwhile, Sandra sat by the window of her hotel room, still awake. The night had passed, but sleep never came. Her phone buzzed suddenly. A message appeared on the screen. It was from a number she didn't know. I know what he told you tonight. Please don't let him go. He needs you now more than ever. Her heart stopped. There was no name, but something about the tone felt real, almost pleading. She grabbed her coat and rushed toward the door, her heart pounding. She didn't know who sent the message or what she was walking into, but she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't let him face whatever this was alone, and as she stepped into the cold morning air, their stories, past and present, began to move toward each other once again. The distance between truth and forgiveness, the city was still half asleep when Sandra stepped outside into the gray morning. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening like mirrors. Her shoes splashed softly against the wet pavement as she hurried toward the car. The air was cold and sharp, but her thoughts were louder than the wind. She didn't know where Keanu had gone, only that something about the night had shifted forever. The words he had said before leaving, later might be too late, kept echoing in her head, growing heavier with every passing minute. She drove aimlessly for a while, her hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel. The sun was rising over Toronto, its pale light spilling across the skyline like a promise she couldn't quite believe. She replayed the moment he confessed, the look in his eyes when he said he was afraid of losing her. She had waited years for honesty like that, yet when it came, she hadn't known how to respond. Now she wished she had said something, anything, before he walked away. Her phone vibrated again. The same unknown number sent another message. He went to see Lena. If you care about him, find them before he leaves again. She frowned, her pulse quickening. Lena. The name sounded familiar, but she couldn't place it immediately. Then she remembered the woman from years ago, someone Keanu had mentioned once in passing, his voice soft and full of regret. Sandra didn't know the full story, only that Lena was part of a chapter he rarely spoke about. She hesitated for a moment, then turned the car toward the old art district near the lake. The streets there were quiet, filled with small cafes and empty galleries. When she parked near an old house, she noticed a black car she recognized, Keanu's. Her heart skipped a beat. She stepped out slowly, her breath visible in the cool air, and walked toward the door. Through the window, she could see him standing inside, holding something small and shining in his hand. A woman stood nearby, speaking softly. Sandra froze, unsure if she should go in. Part of her wanted to turn away, to avoid whatever truth waited inside. But another part, stronger and braver, whispered that she deserved to know. She took a deep breath and knocked. The door opened a few seconds later, and Lena stood there. Time had changed her face, but her eyes carried a calm kind of sadness. You must be Sandra, Lena said quietly. He's inside. Sandra nodded, stepping in slowly. Keanu turned when he heard her voice, surprise flashing across his face. Sandra, he said softly. You're here. She looked at him, her voice shaking slightly. You didn't call, she said. So I came. He placed the pendant gently on the table and took a step closer. I was going to, he said. I just needed time to think. She looked at the small silver pendant and then back at him. What's happening, Keanu? Who is she? And what did you find? He hesitated, glancing at Lena, who gave him a small nod before quietly leaving the room. When they were alone, he picked up the pendant again and placed it in her hand. It belonged to my sister, he said softly. She wrote me a letter before she died. Lena kept it all these years. Sandra's fingers closed around the pendant. It felt cold and heavy, as if it carried more than metal inside. "What did the letter say?" she asked. He looked down. "It said that love is the only thing that survives us," he said quietly. "She wanted me to keep believing in it no matter how hard life gets." Sandra felt her chest tighten. "So that's why you went to see her?" she asked. "Because of a letter?" He nodded slowly. "It wasn't just about the letter," he said. "It was about closure, about finally facing the part of me that still blames myself for everything I lost." She stepped closer, her voice soft. "You don't have to face it alone." He looked at her then, his eyes tired but sincere. "I've been alone for a long time," he said, "even when surrounded by people. I thought I had made peace with it. But when I saw you last night laughing under the lights, I realized that peace without love isn't peace at all. It's just silence." For a moment, the room felt still. The sound of the rain dripping from the roof was the only thing between them. She looked down at the pendant again, tracing the word believe engraved inside. "She wanted you to believe in love," she said. "Maybe she knew you'd meet someone who would remind you how." He smiled faintly. "Maybe," he said, "but I was afraid. I thought loving someone meant risking more loss, and I didn't think I could survive losing anyone again." Sandra took a slow breath. "Keanu," she said softly, "love isn't about avoiding pain. It's about walking through it and still choosing to stay." He stared at her, the truth of her words sinking deep. "You sound like her," he whispered. "Your sister?" she asked. He shook his head slowly. "No," he said quietly. "You sound like the voice I've been waiting to hear for years." The silence between them deepened, not empty, but full of meaning. Sandra could feel her heart racing, torn between fear and warmth. "So what now?" she asked finally. "Do we just pretend nothing happened?" He smiled sadly. "I don't think we can," he said. "Too much has been said, and too much has been felt." She nodded, her eyes glistening. "Then what are you afraid of now?" she asked. He hesitated before answering. "That you'll walk away," he said. "That I've already missed the moment." Before she could respond, Lena returned to the room, holding a small photograph in her hand. "There's something you both need to see," she said. She handed it to Sandra. It was an old photo. Jennifer, young and smiling, standing beside a small stage. Behind her was a familiar face. Sandra gasped softly. "That's me," she whispered. Keanu leaned closer, stunned. "What?" She nodded slowly. "I did a charity event years ago in New York. She came up to me after the show and said, 'My brother would like you. You have the same kind of soul.'" I didn't even know who she was then. Keanu stared at the photo, his voice barely a whisper. "She saw it before I did," he said. "She always did." Lena smiled faintly. "Maybe this was all meant to happen," she said. "Just not when you expected." Sandra felt a tear slide down her cheek. "She wanted you to find someone who reminded you of hope," Lena said softly. "And you did." Keanu looked at Sandra, his heart full but fragile. "I don't know what happens next," he said quietly. "But I don't want to keep running from what's real." She stepped closer, her hand trembling as she reached for his. "Then don't," she said. "Stop running." Their hands met, gentle, unsure, but real. The morning light poured through the window, touching their faces with soft warmth. For the first time in years, Keanu felt something inside him begin to heal. Not completely, not suddenly, but enough to breathe again. He whispered, "I'm sorry for all the years I stayed silent." She smiled faintly. "You're speaking now," she said. "That's what matters." But just as peace began to settle, Lena's phone buzzed. She looked at it, her expression changing instantly. "Keanu," she said quietly, "you need to see this." She turned the screen toward him. It was a video, blurry, shaky, clearly filmed in secret. The title made his stomach drop. Keanu Reeves' emotional night with Sandra Bullock, caught at the concert. It was already spreading online. Thousands of comments, headlines, and rumors were flooding social media. Sandra's smile faded as she looked at the screen. "They filmed us?" she said softly. "That moment wasn't for them." Keanu ran a hand through his hair, his calm breaking. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," he said. People will twist it, make it into something cheap. They won't see the truth. Sandra shook her head, her voice steady but trembling underneath. Let them talk, she said. We know what's real. But he looked away, his voice low. They always destroy what's real. The weight of fame once again had turned something pure into something public. The room filled with silence, the kind that comes before something breaks. Outside, the sky darkened again, as if the storm was not finished yet. When the world started watching by afternoon, the internet had turned into a storm. The video from the concert was everywhere, on headlines, gossip sites, talk shows, and endless social media feeds. Clips replayed their faces again and again, dissected from every angle, twisted into stories that were never real. Keanu and Sandra hadn't spoken since the morning. Both sat in their own quiet corners of the city, surrounded by the noise of a world that suddenly thought it owned their truth. Keanu's phone buzzed nonstop. Messages from friends, agents, journalists, all asking the same thing. Is it true? Are you together? He ignored them all. Instead, he sat in his living room staring at the pendant in his hand, the word believe glowing faintly under the afternoon light. The world was judging something sacred, something he wasn't even sure how to define yet. He had spent his life protecting his privacy, guarding the quiet spaces where his soul could breathe. And now, the most honest moment of his life had been turned into entertainment. Across the city, Sandra watched the same video on mute. Her reflection stared back from the dark screen, her expression unreadable. She felt angry. Not at him. Not even at the world, but at how something true could be broken so easily by strangers who didn't understand. She had always admired how Keanu stayed grounded, how he handled fame with calm grace. But she also knew how fragile that calm could be when the world refused to see the person behind the face. Her phone rang. It was her publicist, voice sharp with concern. We need to make a statement, she said. People are already writing stories, and if we don't speak, they'll make their own versions. Sandra listened quietly, her mind elsewhere. And what do I say? She asked softly. That it's complicated? That it's real? That it's none of their business? The woman on the line hesitated. You say whatever protects you, she said finally. Whatever keeps your peace. Sandra ended the call without answering. Outside, cameras were already gathering. A few journalists waited near her building, their umbrellas forming a dark cluster by the gate. She stood behind the curtain watching silently. She could leave through the back, hide until the noise faded. But hiding felt wrong. What had they done wrong? They had shared a moment of honesty, of emotion, of being human. Why should that be a scandal? She took a deep breath, grabbed her coat, and stepped outside. The first flash of cameras nearly blinded her. Voices shouted questions, harsh, endless, desperate for headlines. Sandra, are you in love with Keanu? Was it a publicity stunt? Is he moving in with you? She kept walking, her face calm but firm. No comment, she said quietly, and the world echoed her words like a challenge. Meanwhile, Keanu was sitting in his car outside her building, watching from a distance. When he saw her facing the cameras, something in him stirred, a mix of pride and guilt. He stepped out, ignoring the photographers who turned their lenses toward him immediately. Within seconds, flashes exploded and chaos followed. But he didn't care. He walked straight toward her through the rain that had begun to fall again. She turned when she saw him, surprise and relief flooding her face. The crowd grew louder, shouting his name, but for him, everything else faded. You shouldn't be here, she whispered. They'll twist this even more. He shook his head. They already did, he said softly. So what difference does it make if we face it together? Her eyes softened. Together? She asked. He nodded. If you'll have me. The noise around them felt like thunder. And yet, in that moment, the world seemed to slow. He took her hand, firm but gentle. They can say whatever they want, he said. But the truth doesn't change just because they shout louder. She looked at him, her voice trembling. And what is the truth, Keanu? He smiled faintly. That I meant every word I said that night. And that I'm not running anymore. The cameras caught every second. The way their hands met, the rain falling softly, the small smile that broke through her tears. People would analyze it for days, but none of them would ever understand the silence between the words. He led her toward the car, shielding her from the flashes. Once inside, the noise faded again. She turned to him, half laughing, half crying. "You really think this will make it better?" she asked. He shrugged, a small smile forming. "Maybe not," he said. "But it feels right." They drove without direction, letting the city fade behind them. The rain grew stronger, blurring the road ahead, but neither cared. At a red light, she leaned her head against the window. "You know what's strange?" she said softly. "It's easier to face the world with you than to face my own doubts." He glanced at her. "Then maybe that's what love really is," he said. "Not the easy moments, but the courage to stay when it's hard." They stopped by the lake again, the same place where the night had started. The rain fell in thin lines, making the water ripple endlessly. They got out and stood by the edge, their reflections broken by the waves. "I used to come here when I was younger," he said. "It was where I dreamed about what life could be. Now I think it's where I learned what it really is." She looked at him, her voice quiet but certain. "And what is it?" He smiled faintly. "Unpredictable. Fragile. Beautiful. Like music that only makes sense when you stop trying to control the rhythm." She nodded slowly. "So what happens now?" she asked. "We can't stop the noise." He turned toward her, his expression calm. "Then we speak the truth before others twist it." She looked up. "You mean together?" He nodded. "We'll go live. Tell them what really happened. Not the gossip version, the human version." She hesitated. "You sure?" He smiled gently. "For the first time in my life, yes." The next day, they appeared on a live interview, simple and unfiltered. No lights, no script, just honesty. The host asked gently, "Was the video real?" Keanu nodded. Yes, it was real. And it wasn't a scene or a performance. It was two people sharing something honest. Sandra looked at him, then back at the host. "We're not confirming rumors," she said. "We're just saying that kindness, connection, and honesty are not scandals. They're human." The world watched in silence. For the first time, there were no jokes, no twisted headlines, only quiet respect. Something in their truth disarmed people. They didn't defend themselves with anger or denial. They spoke with grace, and it changed the tone of everything. After the show, they stepped outside, the air fresh and calm. The sun had finally broken through the clouds, and for a moment, it felt like the world had exhaled with them. Keanu turned to her, his voice soft. "Thank you," he said. "For not running." She smiled faintly. "You taught me that running doesn't heal anything." They walked together down the street, unnoticed for once. No cameras, no flashes, just the simple sound of footsteps on wet pavement. It felt almost ordinary, and maybe that was the miracle. Fame could take everything from them, but not this. Not the quiet truth between two hearts that had finally stopped hiding. But just when peace seemed within reach, a black car pulled up beside them. A man stepped out. Sharp suit, dark sunglasses, official tone. "Mr. Reeves," he said. "We need to talk." "It's about Lena." Keanu's expression changed instantly. "What about her?" he asked. The man looked uneasy. "She's missing," he said. "And we think it's connected to the video." The world, once calm again, suddenly tilted back into uncertainty. When truth finally found them, the words "she's missing" echoed through the air like a stone dropped into still water. Keanu froze, staring at the man who stood under the gray afternoon light. Sandra turned toward him, her face pale, confusion and fear mingling in her eyes. "Missing?" she whispered. The man nodded. "She didn't go home last night. Her phone was found near the pier. We traced her last message to you, Mr. Reeves. She told someone she found something important. We need to know what that was." Keanu exchanged a glance with Sandra. The pendant in his pocket suddenly felt heavier than before. "She gave me a letter from my sister," he said quietly. "That's all?" The man frowned. "Did she mention anyone else? Did she seem frightened?" Keanu shook his head slowly. She seemed calm. Maybe too calm. Sandra stepped closer, her voice steady. "Where are you looking for her?" The man replied, "The waterfront. But the weather turned bad last night and visibility was low. We found her car, but not her." A deep silence filled the space. Keanu closed his eyes for a moment, guilt rising in his chest like a tide he couldn't stop. "If she reached out to me, maybe she needed help," he murmured. "And I didn't see it." Sandra placed a hand on his arm gently. "Don't do that to yourself," she said softly. "You can't blame yourself for every broken thing." He looked at her, his voice quiet but sharp. "But I promised her once that I'd be there if she ever needed me again." Her eyes softened. "Then let's find her." They drove toward the pier together, the sky heavy with clouds, the lake restless and cold. Sirens echoed faintly in the distance, and police lights painted the fog in red and blue. Officers moved across the dock, searching the area. Keanu and Sandra walked past them until they reached the edge of the water. The air smelled of rain and salt and memory. "This is where we used to come years ago," Keanu said quietly. She said the lake made her feel small in a good way, like life was bigger than her pain. Sandra watched him carefully. "Maybe she came here for peace," she said. "Not to disappear." An officer approached them, holding a small object wrapped in plastic. "We found this near her car," he said. Keanu's heart sank as he recognized it, Lena's notebook. The one she always carried, filled with sketches, letters, and small thoughts about the world. "Can I see it?" he asked. The officer nodded. He opened it slowly, the pages damp but intact. Near the last page, there was a note written in shaky handwriting. "Keanu, if you're reading this, please don't worry. I'm not running. I just need to leave behind the part of me that's always sad. Your sister's letter reminded me of something I forgot, that kindness can save us if we let it. Tell Sandra that love isn't about holding on. It's about freeing what was trapped inside. You helped me remember that. Thank you for still believing. I'll be okay." Tears welled in his eyes as he closed the notebook. Sandra stood beside him, silent, letting him breathe through the weight of the moment. "She didn't disappear," Sandra said softly. "She just chose to start again." He nodded slowly. "She deserved peace." The officer stepped away, leaving them by the water. The lake stretched endlessly before them, gray and calm now, as if the storm had finally exhausted itself. They stood there for a long time, watching the waves. The chaos of the past days, the confession, the letter, the video, the world's noise, all of it seemed far away. "It feels strange," Sandra whispered. "How everything that began with noise is ending in silence." He smiled faintly. "Silence isn't always empty," he said. "Sometimes it's where healing finally happens." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and saw something she hadn't before. Not the actor, not the man the world tried to define, but someone still learning how to forgive himself. She reached for his hand, and this time he didn't hesitate. "You always talk about loss," she said quietly. "But maybe everything you lost was leading you here, to this moment, to this peace." He turned toward her, his voice soft. "And to you." They walked along the pier, their footsteps slow and steady. No cameras, no noise, just the soft rhythm of two people who had finally stopped running from their own hearts. "You know what I realized?" she said after a while. "Love doesn't always need to be declared in public or proven with words. Sometimes it's in the quiet decisions, staying, forgiving, listening." He smiled. "That's what my sister was trying to tell me all along." As they reached the end of the pier, the clouds broke apart, and a beam of sunlight touched the water. He pulled the pendant from his pocket and held it out. "She wanted me to believe," he said. "And now I finally do." He opened his hand, and the pendant slipped into the lake, catching the sunlight as it sank. Sandra watched it disappear beneath the ripples, her eyes glistening. "So what do we do now?" she asked softly. He turned to her, his expression calm and full. "We live," he said. Simply, kindly, honestly. Weeks passed. The noise of the scandal faded as the world found new stories to chase. Lena was found safe in another city, quietly volunteering at a community center. She sent a short message that said, "Tell him I kept my promise. I'm free now." Sandra and Keanu stayed close, not rushing, not labeling, just learning how to exist together without fear. Sometimes they cooked dinner in silence. Sometimes they walked under the city lights. Sometimes they said nothing at all. And yet, every moment felt full. Months later, they attended another concert. not as celebrities, but as two people sitting quietly in the crowd. When the music began, Sandra turned to him and smiled. "Do you think everything happens for a reason?" she asked. He thought for a moment. "I think everything happens for a lesson," he said. "And sometimes the lesson is that love was never about timing, it was about courage." She leaned her head gently on his shoulder. The crowd sang, lights flashed, and for once, the noise didn't matter. They had both been broken, misunderstood, and tested by life. But in the end, they had chosen kindness over anger, truth over silence, and love over fear. And maybe that was the quiet victory the world rarely noticed, the kind that didn't need to trend, only to be lived. As the final song ended, the audience cheered, the sound rising like thunder. Keanu looked at Sandra, his voice barely a whisper. "Everlong," he said. She smiled. "It always comes back to that song," she replied. He nodded. "Because it never really ends. It just keeps playing, quietly in the heart." And somewhere beyond the lights and the noise, the universe seemed to agree.